My first visit was to the Brewster Museum, located on Main Street right in the center of town. Although the museum was small, it did have a good number of artifacts left over from the mining days, in addition to a number of photographs. I entered, thinking I had found the right place, but despite the wealth of available information, I could not find the location of the mine entrances. I spoke with the curator, who wasn't sure exactly where they were, but she had heard that one entrance to the Brewster mine was located on Marvin's Mountain behind the train station. She suggested that I visit the Putnam County Records and Archives, located just 1 mile away. I took her advice and found a great deal of historical information about the towns in Putnam County and the old mining days that seem to have been almost forgotten by current residents. To my disappointment, the people working at Records also had no idea where the mine entrances were located, but the clerk was sure they had all been sealed off sometime in the early part of the 20th century and are now inaccessible. Although I could not get a clear answer as to why all the mine entrances were sealed, one person, a volunteer, told me quietly that it had something to do with the local legend of ghosts and devil worship. This statement furthered my interest enough to spend the rest of the day carefully reading documents dated back to 1790. The hours seemed to pass quickly, and before my research was completed, one of the volunteers asked me to leave. It was closing time. I returned every day for 4 days early in the morning to continue my research. I spent hours going through piles of material that included old news clippings, several of which were so incredible they would result in months of research and numerous field explorations. According to local newspapers dated 1899, the phantom lights were not seen until after the cave-in of 1895. The number of cases of the spook lights in my files as of 2009 is 36, all from the locations of Tilly Foster, Reservoir, and Upper Magnetic Mine Roads in Brewster. It's interesting to note that sightings of the lights made before 1950 were called ghost lights, while reports from witnesses after 1960 referred to the phantom lights as UFOs. In December 1995, I received a report from 2 young people who were out for a Halloween Eve drive but had a terrifying close encounter with the ghost of Reservoir Road. The 2 witnesses I identify as Jane and Carl are residents of a nearby town. The 2 drove down Reservoir Road at 11 p.m. Everything was quiet until Carl mentioned he had just heard a noise that sounded like a voice whispering in his left ear. The voice startled him and was very deep and sounded like a man trying to talk with a very sore throat. Carl had trouble understanding the voice, but it seemed to be getting clearer. He was sure that the voice told him, "Back away and leave this place." When he told Jane, she laughed and expressed disbelief. She thought he was making up this voice because it was Halloween. Carl insisted that he did hear a voice. He abruptly stopped the car and got out to see if anyone was on the road, but neither of them saw anything. Carl walked down the road, away from the car. For some reason, Jane suddenly felt very concerned. A wave of fear rushed through her. At first, Jane attributed the fear of being in a dark, lonely place, but just then she heard a sound in the empty driver's seat. Right before her eyes, a depression formed in the seat as if someone invisible had just sat next to her. Carl returned to the car, and when he opened the door, he immediately asked, "Do you smell that?" Jane didn't smell anything unusual, but felt very uneasy. Although scared, Jane was still convinced that Carl was trying to play some kind of trick on her. Again, Carl pressed in a very shaky voice, "Jane, do you smell that?" At that moment, a strong smell both people described later as burning sulfur permeated the car. Now nearly choking, Carl and Jane jumped out into the cool night, gasping for fresh air. Then both of them heard what sounded like chanting in the woods alongside the road. Carl reported it sounded like Latin and guessed that someone was doing some type of ritual. Carl and Jane were very scared, and they started to pray for help from angels, good spirits, and other positive beings. The chanting and sulfur smell stopped almost instantly and was replaced by a strong and pleasant fragrance of lilacs. They got back into the car. The smell of lilacs was almost overpowering. They began to drive slowly to the southeast end of the road when suddenly they heard an explosion. They stopped the car, fearing an engine fire, got out, looked around, but saw nothing. Without any sound or warning, a bright globe of blue light the size of a basketball appeared on the north end of the road, and with incredible speed whisked past them, turned, and vanished into the woods. Carl and Jane both reported that the sphere of light passed by them. It was so close it pushed them both against the car. They also noted that when the light was at its closest, they felt a prickling feeling like ants were crawling up and down their backs. The feeling faded as soon as the light passed, but now they were plenty spooked and definitely got more than they bargained for that night. Carl and Jane really wanted to get out of there, but the experience was not over. As they entered the vehicle, another loud explosion shook everything once again. It seemed to be coming from the woods on top of a hill to the left of the road. They looked toward that direction, and Jane reported that she saw something large. She thought it was a truck coming down the path. Carl frantically started the car, put it into gear, and sped down the road. Jane remembers looking out the back window and seeing a lit object come out of the woods to the road and shoot straight up into the sky. They drove home and never returned to Reservoir Road and the old mine again, at least not after dark. The entrance to the Creton magnetic mine was less than a quarter of a mile from where Carl and Jane had their encounter. From 1992 to 2005, the Putnam County Sheriff's Office investigated reports of strange lights and weird little men in that area. Several nights during the summer of 1998, local police chased a small hooded being into the mine entrance. Thinking it was a child, they called in a rescue team, but nothing was ever found.